Hello, everybody, and welcome to Why We Huddle. This is a show that we're going to look at the different podcasts that make up the College Huddle, and we're going to talk about what makes their school great and what has really made them a fan, as this is a first fan podcast community. For today, we're going to have Hooligan from Sound the Siren, Washington Huskies podcast. Be sure to check it out, and let's find out more about Washington. And welcome back, everybody, and welcome to the show, Hooligan. How are you doing today?
I'm good, Daniel. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Now, I've got to say thank you for being on the first episode. I figured what better way to show the national reach of the College Huddle than talking to someone who's on the complete opposite side of the country from me. I'm down in the Southeast, you're up in the Pacific Northwest, and this is going to be a fun venture for us. So, you're here to talk about Washington today. What are some things about you? What are some great things about the school that you can just tell us right off the bat?
Yeah, I think the things that come to mind first when I think about Washington and Washington football, um, and I'm going to repeat a theme that our athletic marketing department marketing talks about a lot, and it really is. Sometimes they might say it a little too much, but it is the greatest setting in college football. No, no disrespect to any other stadium around the country. It's one of three stadiums in the entire country where you can take a boat to the game, and it's more direct. Where at Baylor and at Tennessee, it's a river on in Seattle at Husky Stadium. It's right on Lake Washington. About a half hour boat ride from Husky Stadium would put you through the Ballard Locks and into Puget Sound, from which you can connect out to the Pacific Ocean on a nice day, as as it was when the background was pictured. From spots in the upper decks, you can see not one but two mountain ranges, and then certainly also Washington has a tremendous history of success in all athletics, but certainly in college football. After the 2023 season, Washington is the 17th winningest program all time by number of wins, trailing in terms of all-time Rose Bowl experience, Rose Bowl appearances, which was something that was a big deal in the era of the Pac-8, the Pac-10, and the Pac-12. Rest in peace. Trailing only USC, Michigan, Ohio State, and tied with Stanford for most Rose Bowl appearances all time. Certainly, I know we kind of flew a little bit under the radar for a while there, but I think a lot of it's like, hey, wait a second, Washington in the national championship game. That really came as no surprise, and it's not necessarily where we expect to be there year in and year out. But this program has had a long history of high level success during the era of the Pac-10, or at least the first 25 years of the Pac-10. Washington was the second most frequent conference champion, trailing again only USC, who was a true blue blood. So I know particularly, you mentioned being, corner to corner across the country. Seattle might be nigh on to Alaska for most folks down in the Southeast, or nigh on to being across the Pacific Ocean. But we care a ton about college football, and it's not just the environment and the scenery. Husky Stadium is very, very loud, going back to a 1992 kind of first night game at Husky Stadium following our split national championship, where the Huskies took the coaches poll. The Miami, unfortunately, got the AP vote. In 1991, we hosted a top ranked, or a highly ranked Nebraska, and set a decibel record of over 133 decibels, louder than a jet airplane flying directly overhead. So that's some of the kind of the initial things that definitely stand out, or highlights for the university and the program.
Oh man, yeah, that was definitely full of highlights. Thank you for that. And I do want to say, and this is not something we talked about and talking ahead of time. I actually did want Washington to win that national title. One, because you were the program that wasn't necessarily a blood. I mean, still a successful program like you talked about, but also for the Pac-12, who didn't win a national title in the playoff era yet. I thought that would have been fitting. Uh,
Yep.
at that point, they just went all the way. Unfortunately, came up just a bit short. But you did have a fan, at least in Florida. A lot of us were going for you.
Appreciate that.
Um, and so, really, I've got to ask, you talked about your stadium and how loud it gets. And I always hear how loud it gets now. I'm also from the SEC, but I'm really impressed though. Like we look at your background where it's a stadium and it's not as closed in as, let's say, the Swamp at Florida, where it's got two massively high end zones. So I am impressed because we do hear how loud your stadium gets. Now, what is it that you call your stadium, or what's the name of Washington Stadium for those who may not know?
It's Husky Stadium. For a long time prior to the remodel where they removed the track, there was some references to it as the old gray lady, because it did show some signs of age before the remodel happened. One of the things, and the images that you see of Husky Stadium, or even my background, it's somewhat deceptive. It looks kind of shallow and open, and it certainly is more open. I'll kind of duck out of the way, looking out to the east side of the stadium, which faces out toward the lake. But as you climb, certainly, I would say the slope in the lower bowl is fairly shallow, and there's great sight lines from all of the lower bowl, and there's great sight lines from everywhere in the stadium. But the upper deck with the cantilever definitely gets steep, and if you head all the way back up into these wedges, you're a long way up, and on a lot of that noise that's generated from below you just hits that cantilever roof and bounces right back down. Part of my own history as a Husky fan, and during my time as a student at the University of Washington, I actually volunteered in our athletic department my last year. And the press box is now up kind of under the wedge of the roof. After the remodel, prior to that, it was all the way out literally hanging from the edge on the south grandstand. And in situations, as I had mentioned, where the decibel levels started climbing, Husky Stadium was well known for making cameras shake. In my own experience, I've stood out on the press box on graded metal, that's ultimately bolted with some pipes up to the ceiling, and had that be shaking underneath me from crowd noise. So it's
No,
an
thank
experience
you.
I'm glad that I don't necessarily I will happily experience from any seat in the house, but not having to look down 200 feet of empty air beneath me while the ground shaking underneath my feet.
Completely understand. I'm not much of a heights fan, so like I can do high up in stadiums, but that experience sounds like nothing I would ever want to do. So, congrats on being able to.
I'm glad that I've done it, but like I said, I'm not exactly in a rush to volunteer to do it again.
I can definitely understand that. So, another question that I have, and I know generally one of these, but what schools would you consider to be rivals for Washington?
Yeah, it's certainly the University of Oregon and Washington State University are certainly the big two. There is what I would say is not necessarily lesser rivalries, but not necessarily. I think Washington trails only in terms of the all-time records. The only schools in the former Pac-12 that Washington trails in the all-time series are USC and UCLA, and I believe Stanford. But there's certainly some lesser rivalries there. It's also kind of sports dependent. Certainly, college football, the biggest and kind of most heated rivalry is definitely Oregon. Um, for the rest of the college football world, and anybody that starts to follow me or Sound the Siren, and some of my colleagues as part of this College Huddle journey, you're going to get a firsthand introduction into to Oregon and Washington Twitter, and it's a special kind of fun. I'll just say it that way. But like looking at like I said, the university takes a whole lot of pride in its success across its whole athletic program. Featured most recently in a movie about the 1936 crew team, the Boys in the Boat. That's based on the University of Washington crew team that went to Berlin and beat the Nazi German team in 1936. So there's also a significant history and rivalry with Cal in that particular sport. That's carried through the day. At one point, there was previous lyrics to our fight song that was specifically made reference to basically just kicking the crap out of Cal. So there's rivalries interspersed, and certainly I would say that a lot of the fan base is going to be sorry to see that year in and year out relationship or good-natured rivalry in most cases go away or not be a yearly occurrence. But certainly the primary two would be, I would certainly describe Washington State. It's a big brother, little brother relationship, where there aren't as many Washington State fans that will admit that when they're not playing that when they're not directly the opposition. I would say there's less Washington State fans that root for Washington, but when we're not playing the Cougs, decent amount of the Husky fans will cheer for the Cougars. We don't give that kind of treatment to that green and yellow group down in Eugene. They hate us, and we just hate them right back.
Oh man, yeah, that's a little bit different than a lot of SEC. Like for example, Florida, you're not going to see us cheer for pretty much any rival for the most part. Of course, then we have the Armageddons, like in the '90s when Tennessee and Florida State played for the national title.
Yep.
Oh, that's the we're not watching, and then or the Orange
Situations
Bowl
where you
this
root for
year.
the asteroid.
Yeah, yeah. Now I've got to ask it's the Apple Cup with Washington and Washington State. Is that going to be semi-annual, or what's
It's
the
right
state of
now.
that?
At least for 4 or 5 years, there is a deal in place that game is going to continue, and instead of being the final regular season game of the year, that's being moved forward to September. So it's going to be our final non-conference game this year. It'll be played this year at Lumen Field, which is the Seahawks Stadium. That's not going to be the permanent site for the game. It's going to, I think, continue to. I think it's probably going to end up looking like a rotation between a neutral site game at Husky Stadium. I still think UW will go to Pullman. There's a lot of complexity to that right now, in that the University of Washington just hired Pat Chun, who had been for the last 6 years the athletic director at Washington State, to replace Troy Dannon, who departed after a few months on the job to go off to Nebraska. So still some feathers to be smooth, or ruffled feathers to appease, but it does look like that particular matchup is going to continue, and then obviously the rivalry with Oregon is going to continue, and be our dedicated year-end matchup in the Big Ten.
And at least you keep that big year-end matchup, because I look at certain things and I think, oh man, what would it be like to not end on a big year matchup? One example I think of is actually UCF, because I'm in the Orlando area. They had their annual matchup with USF, and now this year they're ending with Utah. And I have lots of respect for Utah, and I love a lot of Utah fans I've met and talked to over the last year. Made lots of friends just through that 2-year home and home with them. But UCF and Utah have never played before as like a year-end game. It doesn't have the same impact as Florida State, Alabama, Auburn, or even Washington State, and now Washington, Oregon. So it's at least good to hear that you guys kept something. And I've got to give respect to your program for keeping that. When we saw A&M and Mizzou leave for the SEC, they couldn't work out a deal with their regular year-end rivals, whether it's Texas, Kansas. So it's nice to know that at least one program out there is leaving a conference and still maintaining the rivalry. So that's something really cool, at least for me, who loves the rivalry aspect of college football, that it is continuing.
Absolutely.
Now, and rivalries are part of traditions, which of course moves into my next question, which is, what are some University of Washington traditions? Like, I know that Sound the Siren is named after something for Washington, but what could you tell us about that?
Yeah, so Sound the Siren, we'll start there. Sound the Siren is refers to the noise that that echoes throughout Husky Stadium, both when the team enters the field pregame, or, before the game, and out of that tunnel at halftime, and every time the Washington Huskies, score, the siren sounds in Husky Stadium. And the history of that is that during the Second World War, Husky Stadium was used as a marshalling area, and then certainly with our location on the Pacific Coast, um, with any potentially or incursions, or I know there was lots of concern of invasion from Japan. Um, Husky Stadium was a marshalling area, so that siren has continued all the way through. Certainly, one of the big ones I mentioned, that it's possible to take a boat basically directly to the game. It's the area behind me is largely referred to as, or not officially referred to. It's not its name on the map, but it's essentially Husky Harbor. And a lot of what will happen is that boats will tie up to a log boom, and they'll get shuttled in on like the crew coaching skiffs into the stadium, or right up to the stadium, tie up to the dock, walk onto the dock, up right into the stadium. So sailgating is a huge thing for us. Uh, for those that have access to a boat, or friends with a boat, or one of the local companies, Argosy Cruises, runs a boat tour, of the air of kind of some of Puget Sound and Lake Union and Lake Washington before and then comes to the game. Big one. Tailgating any, certainly tailgating in E1, tailgating in the parking lots close to campus on fall Saturdays are some of the biggest ones.
Okay. And do you guys have like any special, like after the third quarter thing that you do, anything like that?
It's there's the fourth quarter is somewhat of a work in progress. We did have a long running tradition, and it's being kind of brought back a little bit, that somebody dressed up in kind of like a superhero outfit, Captain Husky, and we would do a one of the traditions, and not necessarily like in that quarter break, but a Husky spell out, essentially, that happens every game. Uh, Usually, or kind of prior to this past year, the Husky legend of the game would be identified and recognized in that quarter break. A past player, listing their accomplishments and giving a chance for the whole Husky fan base that was in attendance to give them their plaudits and their applause. But that's moved a little bit forward, and but there's not anything like Mr. Brightside at Michigan, or although we tried to borrow that, and that was discussed on a previous episode of Sound the Siren, and we're not too happy of that. Just like attempted a copy pasta. Uh, but certainly there are definitely some things that we're still working on to improve the game day. The department is still working to improve the game day experience, and some things that are a staple part of the fall Saturday at Husky Stadium.
Okay. Now, I've got to say about that, Mr. Brightside, Missouri does that as well. I got to go this year. I can't repeat what is chanted about Kansas University, but there's something definitely chanted
Probably
right there.
something akin to the alternate, we have some alternate lyrics to the final verse of Bow Down to Washington, that is actually more in reference to our friends across the state, rather than our friends down the I-5 corridor.
Okay. And before I get off the end of the third quarter and asking about that, is there a chance? Do you guys have a moment where the band plays and everyone does this?
I mean, I think if you're a school that plays college football, there's not necessarily that the band plays anything specific, but it's, I think, kind of the same across all of college football, that fans all put four fingers in the air, and
I wish we,
congratulations, we can all count.
yeah. Well, uh, there are actually a lot of schools, at least in the Southeast, where they play specific things at the end
Okay.
of the third quarter and hold four fingers up. Florida, I wish I had the Black Panther meme right now that we don't do that here. We have our own end of third quarter traditions, and maybe one day I'll go through and talk about that. And we've actually got a song, and I'm going to try and there we go. We are the boys that we sing afterwards. When I get when I release my next episode of the podcast, I have a video intro and outro that I'm going to have, and one of the clips of the outro is singing "We Are the Boys," and we sway back and forth and sing this song. So I
Nice.
always ask because I know some places have that tradition or have certain things, and then there's a lot of this. So I'm almost creating a tally of like what schools do, what schools don't. Not that it's necessarily a good or a bad thing, uh, just something to see. But it's always funny. Um, like I imagine that Florida State, Georgia Orange Bowl was interesting at the end of the third quarter as they're trying to figure out, am I supporting Georgia or Florida State right now? And as you said, congrats, we can count to four. But anyways, I'm
There's a
probably
reason
like,
I go by Hooligan. I mean,
yeah. And I'm sure that Vols fanatic is going to be hitting me up and saying, why are you doing this? You're going to come after us next. No, no, no. That's with all respect to those programs. They just have to be two of my rivals.
sure.
Anyways, let's get back to Washington. And you know what? This is also going to be a rival comment for us. We have too many rivals in Florida. But so you talk about you have Husky Harbor. Has there ever been a chance, or is there ever a chance that you could pull a Tennessee and throw a goalpost into Husky Harbor?
Uh, I don't think it will. I don't think it'll happen. I don't think that we'll do that. Although we might have to organize that for when Tennessee comes out and pays us a visit at the tail end of this decade. We do have a home and home scheduled with them, so I'm sure in what that'll be what year six of the college huddle that the Evolve fanatic and I will have to have a discussion and and a pregame show of some kind. Um, but yeah, I don't think so. I think they're fairly well implanted in the cement underneath the field. The one thing that is also a little bit of a logistical challenge is that those alleys or the lanes in between where the lower bowl and the end zone seating, they're fairly narrow, and then directly behind the stadium is Husky softball stadium, where I will say, and speaking of things that ending up in the lake, it is not uncommon when a Husky softball player really gets a hold of one, particularly and anything hit to left field uh, can end up in the lake. Can and does frequently end up in Lake Washington.
And if I remember right, your softball team has ended Florida's run a few times. If I'm thinking
We
of
did,
Yep.
including our national championship year came against the Gators.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. See, I had forgotten about that, and then you're mentioning the softball. I'm like, here we go. And see, this is the connection that college football can bring in the college huddle. When we stop and talk about, hey, here's some memories, here's some fun things, and it's like, oh look, we've got this national championship series in common. And
Yep.
unfortunately, my side was on the wrong side, but that's where we are. So let's go ahead and talk about your fandom a little bit, Hooligan. And I guess my first question is, how long have you been a fan of the Huskies, and how did you become a fan?
It's 30 plus years. I don't necessarily have an exact count or the exact date that I first attended a game at Washington. I believe it was. I mark it more by like I know who was on the team at the time. I believe that either Chris Chandler or Kerry Conklin started at quarterback the first game that I attended at Husky Stadium. I believe, unfortunately, it was a game that we ultimately lost to Oklahoma State, an Oklahoma State team that either featured Thurman Thomas or Barry Sanders as the starting running back, which goes back a ways now.
Yeah.
But I've been an avid dog fan, basically since then. My fandom was ultimately really solidified in kind of my own personal story of how I really, not just became kind of a casual fan, but where I really started to truly pay attention to the University of Washington and the football team in specific. Um, when I was 7 or 8, my parents started looking for a vacation property over on the Olympic Peninsula, and that was about a year or two long search before they found the right place. And so we would leave relatively early every Saturday morning, and invariably what would be on the radio while we were out, either catching the ferry or driving around to the Olympic Peninsula was Husky football and the voice of Bob, and hearing the voice of Bob Rondo and Chuck Nelson call those games. I will also say that I'm consider myself fortunate to that the years immediately following when they purchased the house were some of the best years in Husky football history, including that aforementioned 1991 national championship team. I remember pretty vividly a nice weather out on the Olympic Peninsula on the what is a famous game in Husky history, a 31-0 beatdown of USC. That it's the uh, famous Huskies Todd Marinovich comment of all I saw was purple, no jerseys, no numbers, just purple. Um, and so that solidified it, and then certainly, um, in the last part of the last century, entering the university as a student, working in the athletic department, going to games for 3 years, and then continuing to be a diehard sports fan throughout my young alumni period, despite the historically significant, as a statistical outlier, downturn that our football program took shortly after graduation. Um, but then certainly seeing what the program has accomplished. My loyalty never wavered. My frustration certainly had peaks and valleys, but seeing this program get back to what it was, what it had demonstrated time and time again that it was capable of. First under Chris Peterson, taking us to three consecutive, January 1st bowl games, the CFP in 2016, and then with the 2 years with Coach DeBoer, beating Texas 2 years in a row. Speaking of new entrants to the SEC, and maintaining an unblemished record against Steve Sarkisian, who is our former coach, is certainly something that we have a little bit of fun with. But it really is, it's that sense of community, and there really is, I know this is the case for every fan base across the country, but there is truly something special about Fall Saturdays on Montlake, and the environment, the band, the history, the siren sounding. Um, it's just a special thing.
Yeah, and that's that special thing is why I love talking to people about their fandom, and that's why I love that we're able to meet, today and talk about this. And I've got to ask, you're talking about being special. What are some of your particular special moments? I know you mentioned like watching that 91 national title team. Do you have like a favorite game that you either attended, watched at home, anything like that?
Yeah, I've certainly got I will say, like, I'm going to cheat a little bit and say that I've got a few. Um, I will say I had the lucky circumstances to attend with some of my really good friends the first Oregon game this past season, on October 7th. Kind of a game that was kind of widely recognized as probably one of the games of, if not the game of the year in college football. Was sitting, if I move my just past that purple section on the south side, pretty low down. My left ear did not stop ringing until about early to mid afternoon the following day, if not first thing Monday morning. Um, just the back and forth of that game, how much just, both sides, the noise. I hadn't experienced a game like that since I'd been a student. After that kind of downturn that we took in the mid aughts. That was definitely a special one. I also certainly, one of the other ones that absolutely also stands out was the Apple Cup, I believe, of 2018, a very gray, miserable weather day at Husky Stadium, but it was an Apple Cup in which the winner was going to win the Pac-12 North and go on to the conference championship game. Both teams had everything to play for, and as was often the case when the Chris Peterson led Washington Huskies and faced Mike Leach's Washington State Cougars, uh, Cougars didn't do really much of anything. I believe it was well into I think it was like 28-0 or 27-0 by the time the Cougars finally got on the scoreboard. Um, and it was those Husky teams could throw the football a little bit, certainly not to the same level that the last two Husky teams could toss the football around the yard. But just an out and out dominant. Like, I think we ran a couple of plays that were basically like late in the game, basically same, maybe basically the same play left, same play right, same play left, same play right, just march down the field. Miles Gaskin put it in, one of our running backs, whether it was Miles Gaskin or Coleman, put it in the end zone, and it was just an absolute dominant performance to solidify the second conference championship appearance in 3 years. And I got to share that game with my dad, so that's one of the biggest ones why that stands out.
For sure. Attending games with family, that's something cool that you sometimes take advantage of, for sure. Now, do you have, like, I know you talked about marching the ball down the field. Do you have a favorite play in Huskies lore at all?
There's, I will say, the experience of the final play of this year's Sugar Bowl ranks right up there. I wasn't there for that one, but to just briefly describe what that felt like for me as a fan of a program that had been, we've talked about at points, this program has been to the mountaintop, and fell all the way down to under Tyrone Willingham in 2008, going 0-12. And then kind of with Sarkisian and climb back to mediocrity, 3 consecutive New Year's Bowl game appearances with Chris Peterson, and then he hung up, or he called it quits on his coaching career, and then what looked to essentially to be a potential fallback to, oh well, we could be struggling again with the years of Lake, and then for DeBoer to come in, and then for us to not only get back, win that game, but have a chance in the national championship game. Like for Husky fans, that was something like we didn't necessarily think that, we hoped, we knew that the program was capable of it, but for a litany of reasons and for a litany of mismanagement during that period under Willingham and even with Sarkisian, it was absolutely reasonable for Husky fans to have some doubts about whether we'd experience that moment again. And I think, certainly the call by Tony Castricone, and then the color commentary by Cam Cleland in particular, in his reactions both to beating Oregon, to send us to the CFP, and then on the Elijah Jackson play. Absolute joy. I was literally I stood literally shaking and on the verge of tears seeing my team get back to that level. But then, going back further, I take a lot of pride that during my years as a student at Washington, the Huskies had a 5-0 record against the Cougars, and these were, and at a time that the Cougars program was at a pretty significant peak. They'd had 3 consecutive 10-win seasons that didn't include any wins against Washington, the last of which, my last year as a student, was a very, very tightly contested game. And then Cody Pickett found Corey Williams streaking down the right corner to the right corner on a bullet thrown between 2 defenders to give us a small lead. And then on the ensuing drive, unfortunately, a player that has since passed away in a boating and fishing accident, Marquise Cooper, intercepted Josh Wager to seal the win. And so that for me personally, because it meant that, and I have a bunch of family that are Cougs, so that it meant that I had, during my time as a student, I had bragging rights the whole time. That's pretty special for me, for sure. Or those are a couple of them that stand out. There's a whole litany of them though. Like Chris Polk's what we call God's play, just essentially just power to beat Cal in 2010 to get us back to bowl eligibility 2 years after that 0-8 or 0-12 season. Yeah, I mean, we'd need another episode to talk about all my favorite plays or favorite games or favorite moments.
For sure. And that's what makes, college football so special. You have all these moments. I could do the same thing. I'm sure all of our hosts here at the College Huddle could start just naming off, I remember watching this moment. And I've got to say, I love hearing the story. You keep referencing about going 0-12 or having, this major historic downturn. And for me as a fan of the Florida Gators right now, we've had our first 3 seasons as with a losing record in a row since the 40s. So right now my program's in that historic downturn. So hearing you talk about how much more joy you have seeing where it got, the last few years and all these great plays, and how much more it seems to mean to you because you went through those, rough team times in a way that really makes me happy and be like, all right, I can't wait to experience that same joy that Hooligan has when we finally, get back to where we need to be. So that is definitely definitely something cool to hear, and at least hear from someone who's been there and been like, hey, I sat through it. Now you can too.
I will also say I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Penix to Adunze in that first Oregon game. Uh, with the circumstances of that game, where Washington had controlled most of that game, let Oregon come back and take the lead. Looked like Oregon had chances to probably put the game away or make it very, very difficult. And I was sitting in the stands and I was like, did we just score too? My concern was, did we just score too fast? Did we just score too fast? Because we got the ball back. We stopped them on a fourth down play, got the ball back. Penix hit Jalen Polk for a pretty significant gain to inside the red zone or close to it. And I'm like, okay, let's run Dylan Johnson a little bit. Let's take some time off the clock. Nope. Penix, Mike identified the matchup, had Rome, Rome's one of his guys. Was like, nope, I'm going to trust you to go make this play. Rome did, and it's still certainly one of my favorite images. The aftermath is Rome Odunze just like with a sea of purple behind him, and Ducks destroyed kind of on the ground behind him. Just one hand's got the football, the other's in the air, just reveling in the moment. It's definitely a top five play for me in Husky history as well.
Nice. Now I've got to ask, I know before we began recording, you talked about you've attended, some away games. What is your favorite away game moment, and what is your favorite stadium that you've visited in an away game?
Yeah, I would say um, it's a couple of different ones. So I've been to both of the Arizona schools. I've been to the other three Pac-12 North schools, or the Pacific Northwest schools. My favorite is probably Reser Stadium. There's always been a pretty friendly. I think the attitudes have changed with everything, with the landscape of college football changing, but there's been a friendly nature to the rivalry with Oregon State, and I think if you pushed most Husky fans to say who their second favorite, Pac-12 team was, it's going to be Oregon State. Um, uh, so that was probably my favorite one to visit. And Corvallis is a cool little college town. I like their Reser Stadium. It'll be interesting to see how. I didn't get a chance to go down there to see what the remodel looks like. My favorite away game that I've attended um, was the 2002 Washington visit to Oregon, in which Oregon took a 14-0 lead. Washington tied it before the half and then scored 28 points in the second half, including three long Reggie Williams touchdowns, the last of which he came directly to the visit. Like his angle to the end zone ended up basically he was running directly at a section of Husky fans. So being able to chant "Drive Home Safely" to Oregon fans in their own stadium was definitely an enjoyable experience. But I will also say I had the luck to attend a triple overtime victory in Pullman that same year. So that was a good year for road trips to Oregon and Washington State back in 02. But the
Sounds
Oregon
like,
win just it's a little bit sweeter, particularly because it wasn't triple overtime edge of the seat the whole time, because we had a rough patch and then just kicked the crap out of them.
yeah. And those early 2000s Oregon teams were the ones that really, at least for me, put Oregon in my mindset. So,
Yep,
you
started
know,
to get there. Yeah, they were on the upswing, and they absolutely, when we talk about Washington's downturn, Oregon absolutely took advantage of Washington being down. They became um, they were, Stanford had a run, USC had, certainly their dominant run, but Oregon was right there with them in the mid to late aughts, and sustained that into the early 2010s and to 2013, 2014, and then have, managed to, with a couple of years of hiccup, have maintained a very being a very noteworthy program out west. But and honestly, that's where a lot of the vitriol from that rivalry where it became more two-sided, was in that period, because for a long time Washington just controlled the series, and it took, and there was a long stretch where that was not the case, and now it's back to it. It's for the first time really ever in the series. It is truly like, each of those, basically, I think each of the last 7 or 8 games have been been decided by a touchdown or less, with like the one exception of 2021, which was, I believe, like a 10-point game, and Washington had chances but just didn't do anything with them to make that a closer game, or even to potentially have won that football game.
Like, sometimes blowing out your rival is much better than a close win against them.
Yes, it definitely, and there was a lot of they had a long streak against us that I won't mention the specific length of how many years in a row they beat us. But our first victory to get one back was the first playoff year under Chris, the only playoff year under Chris Peterson. But we exercised a lot of those demons with a 70-21 win in their house back in 2016. So
there you go.
That one felt pretty good. I wasn't there for that one, but that one definitely felt good after a decade and change of pain.
So, what one last favorite, I guess, and I guess this more goes to like going back to traditions or whatnot. Well, what is your favorite non-football moment of an experience of a Husky college football Saturday?
Yeah, non-football related. It really is. It's getting there relatively early, and meeting up. Now it's meeting up with the people that I podcast with. Formerly, there were times where, for a few years, it was meeting up with some fraternity brothers of mine at a kind of at a that I when I was participating in the corporation board for the house that I was in. And it's just kind of that kind of low key. It's tailgating the morning of the game. Um, I'm not necessarily a huge imbiber of tailgate beverages, but having a beer before the game with some friends, and frequently somebody has a TV hooked up, and watching some of the early games, sitting in an affordable canvas chair and just tailgating anyone, whether it's good weather or not. It's really hard to beat tailgating in September, in particular, because the weather in Seattle in September tends to be pretty special. Um, comfortable, kind of t-shirt and shorts weather, not too humid, not too muggy, not overly hot. Although there are definitely some games that the first part of the year that can be uh, quite warm. And I'm glad that I'll put it this way. I'm glad the track is no longer around the field to radiate heat back into the lower
I was
bowl the
going
way
to
it
say
used to be.
that probably would be brutal. Now, that leads me to a question. Being in the Pacific time zone, how great is that for watching college football? You talked about the early games. I'm like, well, I mean, they're noon kickoffs here, but for you, you've got football starting at 9 a.m. and it goes, we talk about Pac 12 after dark. For you, that's like, that ends at midnight. How is that
Sometimes
having that schedule?
we had a lightning game that didn't end until 3 in the morning a couple of years ago, which I won't talk about further. But that's one of my favorite. In terms, if you're a college football fan, I'm sorry to say it, but the West Coast is the best coast for that reason. Being able to, essentially for me, my college football Saturdays, or I wake up, I may not necessarily be watching game day or big noon kickoff right away or right when it goes on the air, but making a cup of coffee, um, you know, feeding my dogs, and kind of rounding into the day, but having college football on the TV, having a chance to usually depending on home or away game, if it's a home game day, and depending on the timing of our game, if it's an afternoon kick, usually watching the first half of a game that I'm most interested in, and flipping back and forth across some other games before I leave to go catch the bus at one of the park and rides to take the shuttle over to the game, and then tailgating with friends, or podcast colleagues. Usually I've sat these past few seasons since we started Sound the Siren. I frequently sit with some of the guys that I podcast with, and that's certainly a ton of fun. And then for away game days, it's football all day. Being able to kind of do chores and take care of responsibilities most of the time, so that when it's time for the the dogs to hit the field, um, that they largely will have my undivided attention.
What is your favorite time slot for the Huskies to play?
For a home game,
Home
give
game,
me a
away, whatever works
for
for
a
you.
home game, give me a 12:30 kick all day. 12:30 or something in the 12:30 to 2 o'clock Pacific time window. I'm far enough out of town where I live and we've had a preponderance of 6 p.m. and later kicks the last few years. Um, that generally entails not getting home until midnight or later, and that's not my favorite thing in the world. I will do it, but I would much rather um, go to a game, be home by 5, be able to watch Pac-12 After Dark, and usually it involves somebody embarrassing themselves in the desert. Thankfully, that is something that happens way too often to the program that I support. So I won't miss Arizona and Arizona State road games by any stretch of the imagination. For some reason, we just don't play very well in that state as a whole. But yeah, for home games, give me that kind of early afternoon. Like I said, give you some time to wake up, get over, do a couple of hours of hanging out with friends and at the tailgates. Um, Great, usually a little better in warmer weather, kind of depending on when it is in the season, and even more so when it's even later in the season. I'd rather be in Husky Stadium at some of even if it's a high of 47 degrees, I'd rather be there for the 47 degrees than 8 p.m. when it's 32 and falling.
For sure. Sorry about the little jittery. My cat decided she wanted to hop on the desk. Of course, right?
No worries. I've got in addition to dogs, we have cats as well, so
Yeah.
I'm used to it.
So I've got to ask as we look towards the future, because Washington's in an interesting spot of now you're joining the Big Ten. And this ties in with your favorite kickoff times. What do you think if you get those 9 a.m. kicks? Those big noon games on Fox. How will that feel? Will that change? Is that something you're looking forward to?
Um, I will say that I'm certainly more looking forward to it for an away game than I would be for a 9 a.m. kick Pacific time. Um, I'll That'll involve getting up a little bit earlier and uh, probably I'm a fairly habitual, 2 cup of coffee a day drinker. A 9 a.m. kickoff at Husky Stadium is probably going to make that three, and then maybe one of them might be a little Irish at the tailgate right before the game,
Yeah,
whether that be Irish cream or some Jamesons.
the earliest kickoff I've attended was 11 a.m. local time. I've done that a few times in the Central Time Zone for the SEC noon kicks in College Station and LSU. A few things, but I'm thinking 9 a.m. That would be rough, but it's going to be interesting. I'm sure the Big Ten will try and not do that to you guys, but if you're still rolling strong, since that seems to be like their top slot is that noon slot, especially with the SEC on ABC, they're trying to push as their top slot at night. That noon slot that may end up coming to the West Coast, and
Yeah.
but
I what I will say is kind of again, it's the what part of the season that it's happening dependent. I would much rather a 9 a.m. in September than a 9 a.m. at November 30th.
and how
That's too
is
early,
this?
particularly with our seasons now always concluding with Oregon. That's just too early in the day to deal with Duck fans.
Oh yeah, that's got to be a night game for you guys. A, so both fan bases are roaring, ready to go, and B, no one wants to watch even as a non-biased. No one wants to watch two fan bases come to the school with blankets, not because they're cold, but because they're trying to sleep in the stands. But oh man, so good luck with that. Now, with that said, what are some things you hope to see in the future? I'm not asking for like a prediction this year or how you think records will play out, but what are things you're hoping to do? Whether that's travel and see games in Happy Valley or the Big House or the Horseshoe, or any sort of maybe you want to see Washington win another national title. What are some things that you're hoping to see sometime in the next decade or two of your fanhood?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly would like to see us get all the way to the top of the mountain, of course. Again, um, I certainly think I'm excited about some of the opportunities in the Big Ten. Trips to, you know, pretty high on my list. Trips to Iowa, seeing Michigan, seeing the Horseshoe. Um, I've got a good friend in the Midwest, and so that'll be a kind of an opportunity, as we were talking about a little bit pre-show, about the opportunity to just kind of travel and like where sports can be the excuse for a good getaway. And um, that's certainly something. I think with the remoteness of Happy Valley, I'd like to see it, but it's not at the top of my list of new things in the Big Ten. I think, in terms of more of the short term, I think, and if you ask, and I think it's a sentiment that I share with a lot of Husky fans, and particularly with some of my colleagues on Sound the Siren. I think we're really excited. Like, yes, that have we had a ton of turmoil coming out of last season, where shortly after the national championship game, our coach left for Alabama, and we went through a coaching search, and then we went through an athletic director search in October, and then another one within the last month. I think we're all really excited, and we're not to take anything away from Kalen DeBoer as a football coach. But I think what we're really excited about is that we think, and from everything we've seen from Jed Fish, he's pretty close in terms of his X and O's and strategy and game management and team management. But he's inarguably a much, much better recruiter than Kalen DeBoer. And this is not a place that should be all that hard to recruit to, or it's certainly not as hard to recruit to it as DeBoer and sometimes his staff made it. And the Fish staff is definitely getting their noses in all of the battles that it needs to, and really being on the front foot about talking about what the University of Washington can be is. And seeing that, and being able to have a little more recruiting juice is certainly something the fan base is really excited about, and it's certainly something that's been proven a little bit already. We got a commit earlier this week from, yes, it's a year and change out from the top prospect in Oregon for the class of 2026. We're right in the mix for a number of 4 and 5 star players out west. And those are battles that the previous staff wasn't as willing to get involved in. At spots, they were doing a really good job, but it was not an across the board, we're going to just go get the best talent, period. They had more of a predilection to, let's find the under the radar gems that we can coach up and fit our system.
Okay. Jed Fish, former Florida assistant learning under Steve Spurrier, and rumored to be one of the guys, if Billy Napier doesn't work out, we will see, that we may go after. So you might have a reason not to like me in a few years. We'll see.
We'll see. But
Yeah.
I also think, on that note, like, I think it would be somewhat of a surprise for Husky fans to see him leave this year.
Yeah.
After what we've just been through, I don't think anybody's expecting Jed Fish to be here 5 years or 7 years or 9 years. That's just not the way the game is played anymore. But for him to go where he wants to, whether that's Florida or whether that's an NFL head coaching
Right.
job, he's got to win, and he's got to stock the cupboards. And if that's what we expect him to do that. We expect him to to follow up on his word. Like, are we going to hold his feet to the fire if he signs the second best recruiting class in Washington history? He's talked about signing the best class that we've ever had. Are we going to be like, oh, it's only the third best in terms of the recruiting rankings? No. But with where we've been recently, recruiting more talent to this place. It's gonna all that does is make this job more and more attractive
Right.
to whoever does replace Fish when he leaves.
And he may be there forever, may end up being this is his fit. He loves it there and
If it
goes
is,
on.
great. But
So,
if not, recruit, win,
yep, set it up for the
and
next guy,
yep.
if not. So, Hooligan, where can the College Huddle fans find you, find your podcast?
Yeah. So I am on Twitter at hooligan7_STSUW. And then on Instagram at hooligan7_UW. Sound the Siren is on both Twitter and Instagram at Sound the Siren UW. And then we are on YouTube at Sound the Siren UW.
Awesome. Well, I can't wait to see what goes on. It's been a pleasure talking with you, Hooligan. Again, thank you for coming on and appearing on this first episode, in a way, the pilot episode of Why We Huddle. And really, good luck to you guys this year. I will definitely be checking out some of the Sound the Siren stuff. Washington really intrigued me last year, seeing how well they do. Jed Fish does have some of UF's attention, at least some of our fans, after they saw what he did at Arizona. They were bummed that he
Sure.
signed for Washington because they're like, okay, he may be a closed door now. But definitely something I'm going to keep an eye on.
And if he does go your way, we'll say thank you for the buyout money.
Oh yeah, that's another good thing. And with that said, thank you everyone for listening and have a great day.
Thanks, Daniel. It's been a pleasure.
Pleasure talking to you as well.